And you can.
How's that? Can you hear us now?
That's perfect.
Okay, Cassie can hear us. We're good. Let's go. I'll change.
Ready? Make a motion. Okay. That's calling into order.
Okay, now that business is.
You hit send.
You make that harder than I ever do.
Hey, Commissioner Williams, I think she deserves a cookie.
And it was Quander.
Caitlin.Quander.
It's
Caitlin.Quander@gmail.com.
She deserves something.
yeah.
CAITLIN.
Well, she had to pick between this and an HPC meeting. See, and I had a T in my hand. She picked one.
Amen.
Remember, bring cookies for the HPC meetings.
CAITLIN. Gmail.
I was gonna check.
Yep, I sent it.
They went ahead. I'm gonna check the check. Good, thank you.
No.
Sorry, lie.
I'm afraid they might all be coming.
I have a second side.
Thank you, Tanya.
You're welcome.
And thank you, everyone, for leaving some for the last person in line.
CAITLIN.QUANDR@gmail.com.
Is she saying she's not getting the invitation?
Yeah. She said her Microsoft was down, so then I sent it to her Gmail and she's still not getting it.
I was having trouble with my email too. Can you text her the invitation?
Oh,
You can add those new phone numbers usually.
Yeah.
We could probably start, but.
let's see.
So what did the kids do with can you give us a report of the state legislature while we're waiting, since you give your report? Trustee Dottie took the kids to the state capitol this morning, the exchange students.
Yeah, there were 8 foreign exchanges. In fact, we were introduced on the floor of the Senate.
Oh, wow.
Senator Marchman introduced us,
Oh,
and poor thing, her whole staff is sick. So she
no.
was kind of running solo, and she showed up just at 9. And it's so interesting. They're not really.
Oh, there she is. Okay, she got it.
And so it was very fast. Roll call. Introduced us, there wasn't much happening.
All right, let's reconvene here. Evening, Attorney Quander.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience. I'm sorry, we've had a day. We're not receiving any incoming messages on Outlook, and I don't, I've heard that it's kind of nationwide. So, it's been a great day.
Yeah, we're all kind of struggling with that, I think, but here we are now. So we've approved the consent agenda, so we're on to general business, Attorney Quander. And I was hoping that you could introduce resolution 2026-01.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. So at our last Lyons URA meeting, there was discussion and some presentations by an applicant developer. They go by Roots to Revival for a project proposed at 402 Main Street. And thank you all for the great input that was provided at our last meeting. So At this point, we have a negotiated development agreement that is in your packets. And I apologize, I'm not there, so I'm not sure if the developer is there and if they'd like to give a bit of a presentation. I'll give an overview. I think there's one item they had wanted to speak with the board about that's not included in the draft right now. High level, as you all may recall, this is a request for a project for tax increment up to $1.7 million, $746,469. And the negotiated concepts within the agreement, provide a timeline under which they have to commence construction, by when they have to complete construction, and that's when they are can access increment for reimbursement. And the agreement also acknowledges kind of your existing commitments with other, well, really just the one with the grocery store. So with that, I'm happy to kind of turn it over. I think the open item that they wanted to ask about was kind of this discussion around a payment shortfall. We received the direction from this board at the last meeting that you did not want to include this sort of kind of catch-up concept on the back end if it takes a few years to sort of dig out of the negative increment that we're in. And I think the concerns on our side were just how to administer that and how to draft it so that we're not arguing about it 20 years from now. I think Director Eystone had some concerns there too on administration, but if you guys wanted to revisit that, they can certainly ask for that. I think the only other item to flag that is in your cover memo is we had some final back and forth on the indemnification provision in section 7. We have added in their requested language. The concept of this is because the Lyons URA is kind of arguably providing some financing towards the project, even though you're not a property owner, if there was something that happened during the construction and someone was hurt or there was a liability, they would typically bring a claim against a property owner. But in the abundance of caution, we also add Lyons URA as an indemnified party. So if a plaintiff brought a claim, they as the developer and property owner would indemnify the Lyons URA. They are willing to do that, but they have asked to add a kind of outside date of 24 months following substantial completion on when that indemnification would end. I think that's a pretty limited risk. I have never had a URA be sued related to a construction project because they're providing funding. And so I think the chance of it is relatively small, and then the chance that it would occur 2 years after substantial completion is relatively small, but still, want to lay out that risk for you and make sure you're comfortable with that requested change from them. Otherwise, happy to answer questions, but I believe we have a pending resolution 2026-01 and the draft redevelopment and reimbursement agreement ready for your approval.
Thank you so much. Before we ask the applicant for their presentation, are there any questions for Attorney Quander? Okay. Do you have a presentation?
I just had something to read.
Sure.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I have to bring up my thoughts. Thank you again for your time tonight and working through this with us. We just wanted to briefly revisit the payment shortfall clause, which was removed from this latest draft, and we're just asking the board to consider adding it back in. The concept is simple. If there's not enough increment in a given year, as is the case right now, we wouldn't get paid anything that year. And we fully accept that risk. But if in a future year, there's a surplus of increment after Laura has fulfilled its obligations to all the other TIF projects, we believe that any unpaid amount from a prior year should be eligible to be caught up, provided it stays within the overall reimbursement cap. So this isn't a request for additional funds. It's about making sure that the incentive that we're relying on has a little bit more predictability. TIF only works if developers can count on it, and not just in theory, but as practice. So without that, the incentive loses some of its value. We understand that there was some concern in an earlier meeting that this might be complicated to administer, but from our perspective and the perspective of our TIF council, it should be pretty straightforward. Each year, the district calculates how much increments available. Each project's obligation and maybe past shortfall is already documented, so determining whether catch-up is possible should be really evident by looking at the books. We've met the but-for test. This project truly cannot happen without TIF. So we're investing heavily in bringing this building back to life in ways that benefit the entire district. We're simply asking that Laura show up as a true partner in that effort, one that's willing to support some certainty where it can. We also understand there's been some concern about setting precedent that came up in the last meeting. And from our point of view, this clause should be included in all the future agreements, including the hotel, because it creates a fairer and more effective incentive structure that's a good precedent to set. So thank you again for considering this and Richard.
Do we have any questions for the applicant?
Would your request be that in future years, if there were increment that accrued to the Laura, but not necessarily from your project, that the project would get the proportional share if there were other projects also competing for that increment?
So we would, I think what we're asking, if I'm understanding what you're asking, we would still get our proportional in future years if there's enough increment and excess. All the projects would get their incremental share like they would typically. If there's additional increment left above and beyond kind of the obligations to existing projects happening, then that would go towards that shortfall. So let's say we didn't receive $50,000 of TIF. It would, if there was increment extra, we could start chipping away at that $50,000 that we didn't receive in past years.
If we had a shortfall in the first year, say the first year after,
Mhm.
and then in the fourth year after, if other projects had also come in that had some claim to some fraction, then they would get their fraction and you would continue to get your fraction along the way.
So we get kind of everybody would get whatever they negotiated first. And then if there's money left over, then we can go back to the money that we didn't get paid because that was a shortage.
If I can, I think what he's asking is, if there is that additional, are you okay with it being incremental for everyone? Or are you asking that it all go to Roots to Revival?
I think if other agreements had this same setup, like if they had that same catch-up clause, then yeah, I think it was like a pro rata distribution of the excess would be fair. I think we're just looking for just kind of a fair distribution and just like an effort to meet the obligation to the greatest degree.
I see Director Eystone is on the call. Director Eystone, do you have any input?
I do. I think that the URA board would just need to be okay with the thought that that excess would come from the URA's portion, if you will. So we're entitled to 20% of the increment in any given year for this agreement. So if we couldn't meet that obligation for their 80%, are we going to dip into our 20% so that we can help meet that? Or in a future year, to make up that difference, we would be essentially dipping into the URA portion of any increment remaining. So I think that that's the piece that the board probably would need to think about.
And Attorney Quander, thank you, Director Eystone. Attorney Quander?
I agree with Director Eystone, and at least the way that it was drafted coming over from the developer and the request of the payment shortfall. And I very much agree and recognize that it is not their fault that the URA is sort of in the hole, right? They may very well be generating tax increment at their project in the first couple of years and have to sort of dig out. And so I understand the rationale behind it. I think it really is a call for the authority when you think about committing to other properties within the plan area, and then the 20% that Director Eystone was talking about, because it allows kind of in those later years to receive revenues derived from properties within the plan area in subsequent years that are not otherwise subject to a priority pledge. And so arguably this would become the priority pledge because you haven't entered into those other agreements yet. And this would take priority over kind of a different project within the broader plan area. Right now, you're only pledging the revenue generated by this project to this project. So it would allow you to kind of make up that from other tax increment within the plan area. So, I think the legal language, if you wanted to go this way, would probably take a little bit more work and massaging. And I think we'd want to feel really confident Director Eystone felt like we understood the priorities here and how to do calculations. But from a URA board standpoint, I think you would be limiting yourself if there are other projects in the plan area that come in that you want to allow them to receive the increment they generate off their own project. So kind of a balancing decision.
Wouldn't this commitment, if we made it to this particular project, also take precedence over things like URA administrative expenses that we now have an obligation to reimburse the town for to a particular amount each year, and any future attorney's fee, financial consultant fees, the type of things we've had in the past? If we've contractually agreed to use our basically unencumbered funds, URA, to make up this shortfall, doesn't that take the money out of our general budget to pay administrative and
Director
professional
Eystone.
fees?
Director Eystone?
Yeah, it would essentially, although we do have the provision in there that with any disbursement, there is still a 2%, I believe it's 2%, Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, admin fee that gets taken out of that. So we would, out of any disbursement, we would at least get the 2%. But I think you're thinking in it the same way that I'm thinking, is that to make up that shortfall essentially would dip into the funds that the URA as a whole would keep back for general operating purposes, and future consultant costs and things like that.
Thanks.
Is there a way to cover our general operating costs in a given year and then excess funds over that amount get dispersed?
I think it's definitely possible. I think it depends on if we're saying excess funds, if we're talking about fund balance, if you will, like the leftover that's currently there as it exists now, or just the current year's revenues.
Anyone else have any thoughts on this? Commissioner Drenstedt, you look like you're.
Yeah, I think it's, as Commissioner Browning brought up, we do have to consider the reimbursement, if you will, of existing expenses or past expenses by the town, reimbursement of those expenses. And it is complicated to make sure that it's agreed upon that those are the expenses that will be held back, and then, what is the increment? And then that increment, what rules apply to it relative to other future agreements for not only the hotel, but other projects that may come forward. I'm just trying to think through, is there a formula and process that could be established to track that everyone would be in agreement with? So I think the first step in that would be how to make sure we all agree that what the administrative and other more expenses are, including the expenses for payback to the town.
Another question. We're 10 years into the 25-year URA term. if we get to year 25, and if there's built up an excess of funds in the URA balance, what happens to any excess funds at the end of the URA's term? If, where do those go? If we got $200,000 in the bank at the end of year 25, what happens to them?
So Commissioner Browning, kind of two things. The Urban Renewal Authority can certainly, between now and the end of that period, make other commitments like this agreement to other projects and in the area. You can also choose to make commitments, as you have in the past, to projects that the city is undertaking that are curing blight, right? There was a road project that the URA invested dollars in. So kind of leading up to that, and we're going through this right now with another URA that has a plan that's coming up in the next 4 years. They are having conversations because they have excess of how do they want to spend those dollars. And then the last backstop component is if you have not committed those dollars in some way to projects that cure blight within the plan area during that term, then you calculate out the proportionate share that would go to the various taxing bodies, and it is distributed pro rata to them. And that's, in fact, the URA that is coming up on that. That's part of the discussion too of, gosh, we really appreciate the partnership that we've had with the city and the school district and the fire district, and maybe it's just more appropriate to share some of this back in the end. And that's kind of part of what they're factoring. But that's what happens to the money if it's at the end of the 25 years not committed in another way.
Would it be possible if we don't grant this request upfront to create a mechanism for reimbursing shortfalls that we put something in the agreement that says this agreement is without prejudice to the applicant's ability to request reimbursement from any unencumbered funds prior to the termination of the URA period? In other words, if there is an excess in later years, they could come back and say, hey, we had a shortfall back on our agreement back in years, 1 through 3. We're still owed under our agreement this amount. If we participate in that excess, we leave that open-ended.
Commissioner Browning, yes. I mean, we can stay silent on it, and they could always ask for an amendment, whether that's next year or 10 years from now. But if the URA in some way wanted to sort of acknowledge the conversation we're having, right, and say, we recognize that there may be a need or a request to amend it in the future, that we're open to having that conversation, we could certainly draft something like that. But yes, this agreement can always be amended or increased or modified in some way as long as both parties are willing.
Curious, what the applicants would feel about that.
I think the goal was to improve the certainty of kind of receiving the budget. So I think we would like something more of a commitment today to know that, there's a bunch of projects come up the last minute, they're choosing with their client, great projects. So I think we're just looking for that certainty to try and plan for, are we going to get these funds or are we not? And is there going to be like a good faith effort to make sure that we should get them?
And I would just add maybe in there that, while I appreciate that, and I think that seems like a fair and generous offer, a lot of what we're facing right now are upfront costs, right? So they're near-term things. And so the ramp up to find tenants to, get everything stabilized is a really tricky time. And so, in 15 years, while it might be nice to get it, it could be more useful sooner if that's a possibility.
Attorney Ponder?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of clarify that last point in that at least the way that the payment shortfall is drafted right now, it really would be on the back end. There wouldn't be a way to sort of get more upfront. as any project, tax increment increases over time, right? Because ideally the value of the property and the assessed value will go up each year. And that's the increment you capture. And so as that's received by the URA, first we kind of dig out of the hole. And then, on an annual basis, assuming the project is completed, you start paying out whatever increment is received related to this project. And ideally that grows and grows. And so year 15 is ideally the biggest year. So I just wanted to clarify that point that even if you were to agree to a payment shortfall, and Director Eisner, if you have other thoughts on this, but I think that would happen in probably years 13, 14, 15, if there were dollars.
What if we increase the percentage share on the back end? If you remember, Moss Rock had a fluctuating percentage share. And what if we increased the share to the developer on closer to the back end to maybe be 85, 90 to try and allow them to capture more when there is essentially, hopefully, more activity that has occurred within the URA. I know that doesn't help the front end costs that you're discussing, but perhaps could offer a little more comfort knowing that at the back end, when the URA is in a healthier position and potentially more projects have come through, that there could be a little more that could go towards the developer.
I think what I'm hearing is that the developer is looking for some certainty, and that doesn't sound like certainty to me. It sounds like probably a really wise bet, but I'm not sure that it would make them.
I've not done TIF before, so correct me if I'm wrong, but that doesn't seem equitable, right? We're just want an equitable share. So if all of a sudden now we get more and somebody else comes on board and they have less of an opportunity to collect, that doesn't seem, that feels like why the URA is in trouble already.
No,
So-
you would be only getting more of your own share.
Yeah.
Your
Of
own
the what your property is generating instead of
More than
80%. Yeah, instead of 80% in the later years, for example, you'd get 90%, which would increase the potential of you to hit your cap of 1.4 million or whatever that cap is by the end of the term of the LURA.
Great. That sounds good.
And again, that's just a suggestion for the board to consider.
I'm wondering if we could do the 90% early and then it trail down or just to because the issue is upfront.
Yeah, and I think I would say that yes, that is a possibility, but the thought of the URA not being whole in the beginning years, and if we don't have the payment shortfall clause in there, that doesn't help as much if I'm thinking of it correctly.
Shortfall
Right.
by having an additional.
Could someone summarize where we are with the current situation? To catch up, if you will, or the relook at the property changes there.
Yeah, Trustee Browning sent, there was an email exchange earlier today about this. Director Eiston, would you like to summarize that?
Sure. Currently, if you remember last year, the URA was negative 141,000. Now remember, that's not dollars, that's increment valuation. It did increase this year to 171 based on the preliminary valuation. I have not received the final yet, but have requested it. And the Riverbend property has not been calculated into that. I do have the way that they calculate the increment, and I have distributed that to the board in the past. I did try to run some sort of what if scenario, if I am understanding how they calculate it. And the Riverbend calculation, what was that valuation? 820, yeah, 822. If you use that value of their improvements of 800, of assessed value, and try and calculate it into that calculation on how they determine increment, it seems like once they capture that, that the URA will be made whole. However, I can't guarantee that I am calculating it correctly because we have been told many times that they don't calculate it necessarily on an account level. And it is very complicated and difficult. So I would say that that's where we're at. The other properties that were not valued correctly as residential and commercial, I believe that those are not going to necessarily help the increment value, but will be a correction to the base value, which also is a little bit complicated. But I do feel like once the Riverbend, if I am understanding it, the calculation correctly, I believe once Riverbend gets calculated in there, that the URA can be made whole, assuming no other disasters, demolitions, things like that occur, which is, never a 100% positive, but.
Isn't the negative 171,000, if that's where we're at now, where we're at, isn't that assessed value rather than actual value though?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
But still the assessed value of Riverbend at 27% assessment ratio will be enough to wipe out $171,000 of negative.
I believe it
Yeah,
will.
yeah.
I tried to plug it into the calculation that I currently have, and it appears as it calculates down that it will. Now that is barring any other corrections that they may have to make that might go in the opposite direction, any demolitions, anything like that, that I'm not aware of. But I do believe that it will get us to the positive, potentially 50,000.
Another thing that I thought of, we kind of exchanged this on emails a little bit. I understand that the overall value is what of the properties within the URA district, which is basically mostly downtown. It doesn't include most of the residential, any of the residential areas in Town and Village. It's what they look at, not property by property. But there haven't been that many commercial property sales in Lyons in the last year, which is the period they look at. The one that we're familiar with, because we talked about it with the assessor's office, was 304 Main property, and the doctor that the doctor bought. It was bought for basically 33% over its assessed valuation. Now, that doesn't mean they immediately bump that property up, but they're the comparable that they're going to be using to look at the values of all the other commercial properties in town. So the most recent sale I'm familiar with, and that indicates that at least in that respect, there's one comparable where values are going to go up. I'm not familiar, maybe other people know of things that I don't, of any property sales in Lyons that have been at less than assessed value in recent years. I don't think so. So they can't give you the exact numbers, and it is a district-wide calculation rather than looking, oh, this property's up 822,000 and this one's up 300,000. You can't really do it that way. But I don't know what would cause it to go down. Is where I'm from. So my bottom line, which I think Director Eystone got to too, is it looks like that hill should go away, but we can't get any assurance of that.
Yeah, well, we can't get any assurance of anything right now. We can make educated guesses. I mean, we don't know if a property is going to be purchased by a nonprofit. Or.
What about consideration of a revisit clause for this particular item in like June of 2028? I know, that's not right upfront money, but if the LURA is not in the red by or in the black by then and generating what you're intending, we could revisit this to see if there's another mechanism we're willing to institute, whether it's an additional percentage of what you keep or, just something that says we will revisit this in 2 years if the board doesn't approve it today. doesn't have to be a long time, just because it's gonna take you that long to build. I mean, you know, it's gonna take this year to build, another, next year hopefully be operating, but by then we'll know the impact of potentially Riverbend. If Western Stars improves in value or other places, we might see a little, maybe we can get to the black again.
The revaluation cycle that the assessor's office does ends in June of 2026.
It's even June 30th of even years.
2026, so that whatever values that they come up with then
Mhm.
should be reflected in 2027 tax revenue.
Yes,
So that sometime in 2028, we will have
Yes.
better ideas. the whole-
that's why I was suggesting maybe we do July 1st of 28. I said June 30th, but maybe, you know, July 1st of 2028, revisit this. And, you know, you will have only been operating a year. But at least there's a definite revisit clause whether or not this same Laura board is seated.
I was gonna say that's our risk is that.
Well, but if we build it in that we will revisit this in that year.
But there's a, we have, I was just sorry to interrupt, but just like, in terms of. Seeing the need and the relationships, you know, obviously you guys kind of been with us for the ride. If there's a new board seated.
Yeah.
Not see it, so. That's the only risk on our side, I'd say.
And if we build these up, and it's gonna be really successful, they won't know the hardship we face. They'll think, what do you need the money for?
We take them, watch these meetings.
With that or this or this ascending reimbursement if needed, if, you know, I mean, some kind of. Something for you that says you'll either get it early or.
I think Commissioner Williams.
Is it helpful to the project if you have a certainty that it goes from 80 to 90% in the last year? Does that help it up front in terms of the planning?
Or maybe for the first 7 years. No, really, I mean, there's only 15 years left on it.
Yeah.
Right? And the fact that we really, because of the uncertainty of it, you really can't go out and get a loan against it. So it's not a typical TIF deal where we could go, hey, this amount is pledged, let's go get a bond for $4 million or $3 million. We're just kind of, this is trickling in and it's great, helpful. It's really the way that makes the numbers even sort of work. But more certainty up front to be helpful.
To answer, if, forget who asked the question, if there was an escalation, I think the preference would maybe be to ramp it in earlier years. If there was an escalation. or something.
Do 90 for the first 2 years and then 85 for a couple and then back to 80. Try to get 5 at least out of it at a higher, but because the Laura also, as you know, runs pretty much in the red when we're not. Because we still have the fees we're paying as well, and so we have to have some form of. A small amount of revenue coming in to cover that every year as well.
Let me comment on the uncertainty thing. I get your point, and certainty is certainly what you want. You want more certainty when you're starting a project like that, but we have uncertainty too as commissioners and fiduciaries. Right now, we're commissioners of ERA that has zero revenue. And we don't know, it's uncertain for us when we're gonna have revenue again. And further, it's uncertain to us what other projects may come along. Or what the hotel, which has already told us that they have to come back, that they intend to come back for some type of a change to their development plan. We don't know what may come along. And so if we pledge more of our revenues, particularly all of our revenues up front, that creates great uncertainty for us and may hamstring us in either new deals or modifying other existing deals. So uncertainty is just as big a risk for the ERA commission as it is for the developer. And by putting it into later years, either revisiting it in a couple of years, as Director Simonson has said, or putting higher increments at the end of the period also provides more certainty for the ERA that if we do get into the black in 3 or 4 years from now, that we still have some funds to operate on and do other projects with if they come along. So I get your point, but it works both ways.
Trying to build on Director Simonson's notion of a revisit that could start with an in the event there. And it would go on to in the event that certain amount of money net of administrative expenses or obligations of the Laura could be available on a equitable basis to the projects currently active. And I haven't published that obviously, but something in that direction. And so since it would be in the event of, it wouldn't occur if the conditions for the URA were negative at that time.
So that's a legal question. Is it difficult to do in the event clause?
No, I think what we can't do is we can't promise to agree to a future agreement, right? We can't do an agreement to agree because that you can't commit a future board to what decision they would like to make. But we can certainly, in the event of whatever trigger, include a requirement that the board and the developer would come back together to discuss, potentially modifying the percentage or renegotiating the amount of tax increment, whatever, however you want to coin it. Yeah.
Does anyone?
I just,
Yeah, please.
yeah, I mean, it's hard to, we're having a lot of theoretical discussions here and trying to predict what the future brings. To me, it would be interesting to just see some financial scenarios of best case, worst case, most likely case. So we can at least have some discussion with the real, because I think the request is reasonable. And personally, I mean, it's hard to predict what other developments are going to come down the pipe, but we have two of them staring at us right now. And we need to make those successful. So I'm willing to make sure we commit to this and figure out a way, but without seeing real numbers, it's just hard. I mean, because there's so many variables now. So.
Well, a lot of those variables depend on the Boulder County Assessor's Office.
Agreed, and that's what I was saying, come up with scenario, analysis of 3 different scenarios, for instance. And then you have a debate about what's the most likely to occur. Or where we have the most risk if the worst case happens. Anyway, right now, it's just a theoretical discussion. It's difficult for me to follow along.
I like the idea of revisiting it in a couple of years, because at that point you would have actual numbers of what the 2-year revaluation resulted in. And you can't bind a future board, but you can bind a future board to consider it at least, basically force it on their calendar that, when we do this agreement, we said we would look at this again after we got the numbers in on what happened with the revaluation.
Is financing at risk though with having that unknown?
It certainly it's, a big piece of the financing, the stack. And the uncertainty creates a problem with that.
Which they have higher risk, they charge higher interest.
Which makes it harder to do or not feasible. That's just the reality of it.
Commissioner Dante, did you have a question?
Well, I'm just trying to recall if there are any other projects coming down the pipeline that we know of. I mean, I don't know of any personally. Do we know of anything out there that, I mean, I feel like we do have these 2 important projects in front of us. I feel like those are, I heard Trustee Browning say the other day, these are 2 of these.
We have the hotel
Right.
that may come back for a change. I don't know if they change their tip or not.
Yeah.
We have the market kind of sitting there.
Yeah.
What other projects may come along? Who knows?
Who knows?
Well, I'm just thinking there will be additional value generated by your tenant finish permits, so I don't know, to the degree. I don't know the basis of the valuation, right, but the valuation that so far this is built upon, it's just for your structure, so there'll be additional tenant finish permits. We do have, a fairly good size for Lyons building permit under review up in Lyons Crest for a $330,000 valuation. And then obviously the hotel, but other than those, there's properties for sale, as we all know, that, may generate additional change.
I wasn't a party to the earliest conversations about all this, and I'm not sure that my opinion should have the standing of people who were part of that. I wouldn't want to renege on those early promises or people's early interpretations or expectations that were associated with them. That said, it does feel to me as if the most certain interpretation of where we stand is that the LoRa has a deficit, and everyone knows what that deficit is. And there are various ways that it could get cured. There are also ways that it could get extended. We could have some of the same circumstances befall us in the future that befell us in the past, and that you also suffered from. My inclination is to do the clearest, easiest, most straightforward thing, and that is presume that we can only give away what we make from this point on, and that we can't somehow promise to make up the difference from what happened to us over the last few years. So I probably wouldn't be inclined to try to do a catch-up or to do a recalibration, but again, that is subject to my best understanding of the expectations that we all set. Without me sitting in this seat, but all of us are part of a body and a community that made those promises to you, and I don't want to renege on those promises. I wouldn't want to ignore the fact that the 1.7 is an advantage that we would like to grant to you and that we've already tried to engineer for you. It's not as if we're starting from zero. We would be moving around that 1.7, maybe just in one direction. So we have a pretty good head start. We also have, I think, committed to the extent that we'll be able to negotiate it with the owners to carve out the St. Vrain element of that deficit or of a claim on that deficit. So I appreciate that we've done some things already. I would like to do more. I'm reluctant to do more, knowing that we're starting from a little bit of a negative position. And while that feels like it imposes some uncertainty on you, doesn't feel as if it's more of an uncertainty than what we also face.
Others?
Question, the 1.7 and some additional dollars is a maximum.
Correct.
If the first couple of years don't provide the amount of money that would end up at the 1.7 level, does that mean that the total is less than 1.7? In other words, if there's not enough tax increment in, say, year two, does that come off of the 1.7?
Well, it doesn't, no, it doesn't come off of it.
So the maximum still would be
1.746.
And so what would be the mechanism that makes up the difference?
Additional development and valuation increases in the district. Beyond what we are projecting.
Beyond what we're projecting. And if we don't experience that, then it does limit the one.
Then they will only be collecting the 80% of what they're generating. There would be no additional to share.
Sarah? I was just gonna say that the 1.7 is based on what we anticipate our property will generate. So if we miss out on TIF from those first few years, it's kind of, we did an even 80% of whatever our property generates for that 15 years. So it is kind of deducting from the 1.7 because the odds of us making it up based on what we think the projected assessment is. And that's kind of where the uncertainty comes from.
Yeah.
It is, instead of potentially getting 1.7, it would be almost impossible to get it if we miss out on tip in those first few years. It would probably be like.
Or property values stay flat. I mean, if we're projecting year 1 and 2, kind of the assessed tax number coming in around 80,000 or 70, if you take 70 times 15, that's only $1 million. So that, you know, we built into it an escalation, hoping it happens. And I'm assuming that if other people come on board in other projects, they're also going to be asking for their portion of that increment, which means it's not going to be available. We really just have what's our practice to count on. And in terms of certainty, that is what we're bringing to the table. That we're doing a project and we have to pay that tax. That's for certain. So.
Would there be any appetite of the authority to entertain 85% for the first few years? And is that enough to give you a little certainty based on what you were anticipating with the payment shortfall? Because when you take that payment shortfall and divide it by the parties, you know, who it would be divvied up between, would that 5% be more or equivalent to that, what you were projecting? Okay.
Yeah, and I would actually entertain going up to 90%. You know, look at that, when we're looking at the timing, you guys have, the shovels have been in the ground. You know, you guys are going. The hotel shovels have not been in the ground.
I agree.
And so, you know, you'll be generating increment before the hotel will be done. Sure.
But if we went to 90% or something in the early years, and we're still in our
In the-
own year rate, that's creating an obligation.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask.
URA, isn't it?
If Director
might-
Eystone knows what do we have in reserves right now and how much, 35?
I think it's.
How much?
10,000.
I would need to check. But I did want to correct something, Victoria, that you had mentioned. In the later years, the impact of having future development does not impact what 402 Main would get.
But it would the Laura,
With the Laura, that's correct. It's opening up now. Estimated 2026 fund balance is about 38,000 at the end of the year.
What about the concept of the 90 for a couple of years and 85 for a couple? And that revisit clause, or that revisit clause and or revisit.
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, the tension here is that we want this project to go. This
Yes.
project is good for the town. We want this
Yes.
project to be successful and we have fiduciary responsibility. to
Yes.
do it. So that's kind of the tension point that we're trying
Yep.
to figure out.
I've got a problem. The 80% is a high percentage, and I think at the last meeting, the director even said that's a very high percentage.
It is,
I'm
but if,
reluctant to go 90% and create an obligation that I'm not sure.
Other thoughts?
I wish we had more certainty in terms of the assessor's office.
Yeah.
I mean, and, you know, we've had them in and frankly, that wasn't particularly encouraging in terms of competency, or annoyed, efficiency, and possibly also competency. But every indication is that we're out of this when Riverbend is get their new evaluation. I am comfortable with the 90%. Because I think this is the first important project on Main Street in a very long time. And this one must succeed. So I'm willing to take that risk, in the hope that the assessor's office does do their job in timely fashion and that the numbers do take us up. Okay.
Other thoughts? Yeah, I fully agree with you. And will Riverbend not be reassessed in end of June this year?
Well, it should have been January, because our understanding when they were here was if we made them aware
Yep.
between cycles,
Mhm.
they would make that adjustment. But as of January 1st, it hadn't been done. But maybe it will take a month or two.
And not just for that property, but for additional properties, it would be redone based on the fact that you're partial or commercial.
So I am
None of
going,
it's happened yet.
no, I'm gonna reach out to see when we might anticipate seeing that.
Is his name Michael?
Doug,
Doug. So have we reached out to him since January?
just today we were
Okay.
talking about it.
Okay.
We are giving him a little time after
Okay.
January.
Okay. Before we were more. Because we can always have them come back for a visit, right?
And it could be maybe their office is done and hasn't been uploaded onto the site, who knows, but. Our understanding from that meeting was if we made them aware of a property.
Yeah.
In between cycles, they could do that. And we,
So at the very latest, June 30th of this year.
oh, June 30th is when the valuations will be corrected, yeah, or updated. So I will make that, I mean, I just happened this afternoon and I said I would reach out, but.
Commissioner Williams?
Another comment sort of connected to what Commissioner Williams said and to this idea that Riverbend might bail us all out. If they do, or if we think they are likely to, then there's no dollar consequence to any of what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
The only real consequence is whether it would give your lenders some comfort to have a little bit more clarity about when you might get it. That's only a little bit more because there's still a timing question, but you're more likely to hit your 1.7 if Riverbend or other projects, Lyons Crest or others come through and we dig ourselves out of the hole rather than having you help dig us out of the hole. So I take a little bit of comfort in the idea that we could make some adjustments and provide for some catch up, knowing that it is unlikely to cost Delora and it is more likely to give you leverage that we would like for you to have if we can offer it.
I think that's why we proposed it. And I mean, we certainly, again, I'm new to all this stuff, so the concern is that the going to 90, that 10% has to come out of your side of the budget,
Yeah.
correct?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, I get that burdens. So my question, catch up would only apply if the funds are there. So you're not pledging administrative fees. So I think that's why originally we thought a catch up made sense. Just said, look, if the funds are there, let's do it. If they're not there, then they're not there.
And the catch up, it only kicks in if we don't receive a particular. As opposed to.
Yeah.
Increasing the amount and the odds that we can make it. We structured it in a way or proposed it in a way that this catch-up concept only kicks in if there's a year where we just don't get the tip.
And I will say that if I'm also warming to the idea, it's partly because now I understand, at least in part, how you reached your 1.7 estimate and picked your 80% calculation, knowing that you believed that those would converge in the 15 years remaining on the Delora.
Circle.
There's actually a 3-year window built in there, right? Because the amount of calculated TIF money that they're gonna get in 12 years reaches the 1.7 million, whereas there's 15 years left under the Laura. That's where the 1.7 million came from. You took the amount of TIF they were expecting to get per year based on the initial cost times 12 equals 1.7. Did the math today. So I think there's a built-in window to begin with.
And one more question maybe about this pool of funds that we may or may not have. Attorney Quander, is it also common for Laura's to be extended, and if extended, to devote whatever resources they have on hand to their continuing operation?
When you say extended, do you mean the plan term, the 25 years?
Yes.
So you cannot extend a plan term. It is 25 years and it ends. You can adopt a new plan with a similar or different area that would restart the 25-year clock and do a new agreement where you pledge increment generated from that. That resets the base. The plan is 25 years.
And would it be possible or common for resources that were on hand at the initial expiration, maybe to be returned to the tax districts, but then rededicated to a second Laura that was created at that point?
You know, that's a great question. That would take a lot of cooperation with the other taxing bodies. Honestly, a lot of current URA plans are just now coming up on that 25 years. So I think over the next couple of years, we're going to see how that evolves, and if, you know, tax dollars get returned, or if they get committed for, so it's just, I haven't seen that happen, really much, if at all. And again, you would provide the increment that you have, but when you would negotiate with the taxing bodies about the new plan, you would be resetting the base at kind of its new higher value if you're looking at the same area. And then you would be negotiating around sharing that tax increment with those other taxing bodies going forward. Now, could they always choose to give dollars? Absolutely. That's, you know, their budget authority. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's bring it back to the shortfall reimbursement question. Yeah. I'm actually comfortable doing that. I have enough confidence that the Laura is gonna be out of the hole. That if there is a year that you don't get TIP, there will be future years where TIP will be available. I think it's reasonable, and especially if it makes the project go, because we want to go. I would be willing to take that risk.
Me too. Having heard all the arguments, I agree.
Think what risk exactly?
What they're requesting.
To agree to the request.
Reverse what we decided last time.
It's been done before on boards and the authority.
To me, that's a bigger risk than giving them 90% in the first few years. If you're encumbering all of our revenue. Potentially.
Well, if there's excess to.
Net of revenue, net of expenses.
Net of expenses. So I think we're wanting to hear from Commissioner Hanlon, Commissioner Lowell, Commissioner Williams, Commissioner Drysdale.
Not the multi proposed catch-up period, is that what we're talking about?
The shortfall reimbursement.
Yeah, I would be comfortable with that if it's net of expense.
What expenses are we talking?
Laura operating.
Your operating expenses, which would include, in my mind, the payments that we talked about for past and current admin and legal expenses for that year.
So once all the TIF obligations are met, once the operating expenses are met, and whatever is left over,
What gets shared?
but it will be shared only to forward to the minute.
No, it'd go to everyone if it's in their agreement.
Yeah, if they have a shortfall and they have a shortfall agreement.
Payback from previous years.
As of right now, the other agreements do not have.
Trustee or Commissioner,
I'm in agreement.
Commissioner Williams again.
Okay,
So we're in agreement on that. I assume that Commissioner Browning's not in agreement.
I'm in agreement with net of all expenses, that's my
Net of all
problem.
expenses.
Leaving, and that
Okay.
was the concern of our finance director and the attorney, is that you're basically giving them priority on. But if it comes up, if you're not putting the URA potentially in the hole.
Okay. Great, good, okay. Took a while, but we got there. All right,
So we'll need an amendment
we'll need an amendment.
to the motion if someone makes it.
Yeah, so
We don't have a motion.
I'll
No,
move
we don't have
that
a
we add a clause.
We don't
that-
have a motion.
We don't have a motion
don't.
yet.
Motion.
You need a motion first.
Oh, gosh, I'm sorry. Is there a motion to approve resolution 2026-01?
I move to approve resolution 2026-01, a resolution of the town of Lyons Urban Renewal Authority approving the redevelopment and reimbursement agreement with Root Store 902 LLC for property at 402 Main Street.
Seconded? Who did that? Barney?
They point at each other.
No, fine.
All right,
It's just pointing.
all right, so now we have a motion and a second. Now I can propose an amendment that we add a clause regarding reimbursement shortfalls for our discussion. So that shortfalls in years where TIF was not available will be reimbursed after LURA expenses are. For a second,
Second.
any further discussion on that?
Oh, yeah, I do want to thank Commissioner Joyce. I was assuming, I was making that implicit and it needed to be explicit, so thank you for doing it.
Madam Chair, procedurally, if you could also kind of authorize legal counsel to modify and negotiate the agreement, I think it'll take some back and forth probably on that to finalize that language.
Yeah, I would authorize that if the authority is in agreement. Okay. All right, what else do we need to discuss about this agreement?
Is that-
we need to vote on
We need to
that.
Oh, the
We need
indemnity.
to vote on the amendment. Thank you.
She's
All right, let's vote it.
Well, and Madam Chair, I mean, if there isn't anything else you want to discuss, then you can just choose to vote on the resolution. But
Yes.
but if there are other questions, happy to talk through anything. And I would make sure everybody has their eyes on Exhibit A, I believe off the top of my head, that lists off all the eligible improvements so that you're comfortable with what they have articulated that tax increment could be used to reimburse them for.
Yeah, let's absolutely have a discussion about that before we vote on the resolution. The only question I have is about the mural, which we talked about before.
Mhm.
On the north side of the building, I love murals, I love public art. I do wonder about how soon a building might be built that backs up to the mural that obscures the mural. And whether that is a consideration. Anybody?
I think I brought that question up earlier,
Mhm.
actually, because I was concerned about how far it was from the current. I can't remember what the.
I think it's 20 feet. Something.
Yes,
I think it's those are-
Currently, it's
they're-
like
It was 30.
20 feet, but if somebody built there, they could build right to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Can we, how would you and how would the attorney feel about, changing public mural to public art? If there's a better public art idea than a mural?
Yeah. I like that. Well, you suggest the public art between the windows on the east side. Just wondering.
I'm not suggesting anything specific, art-wise. I know better than to do that.
Yeah.
But
Obviously, that location is chosen because it's the biggest blank panel in the building, and for no windows interfere with it.
Yeah.
But, you know, given the state of Miami and the rumors that swirl around that, we don't know what's gonna happen there. You could be all for naught.
so, you know, if the developer decides to create some public art, either a mural or something else on that property, then it can be reimbursed. And if they decide not to move forward with that, then it's not an expense.
I'm not sure what the definition typically is of public art, but could we say art on the exterior of the building?
It'd be public art, yeah.
You could even
Sure.
specify that wall.
Sure.
I don't think we want that wall,
Oh,
If Miami.
but we might want, we want to give you the latitude to do it anywhere where people who might not necessarily be your patrons, your customers could appreciate it.
So yes to that change, public art or mural.
Yeah.
Okay, with you guys?
Anyone else have any conversation suggestions for the expenses?
Question for staff, has this list been worked thoroughly back and forth? Are we, as a town, comfortable that we understand where these numbers came from and the collection of items?
I haven't been involved in the specifics of this
No.
agreement, so.
Yeah, we have not been through it in that amount of detail. These guys have put together their estimates to come up with these numbers, and they will have to show
Mhm.
in reimbursement, invoices and things to have them reimbursed. The attorney and I have, and Director Eystone have all been through the list to see if we feel they are all eligible, and we do feel that they are.
Great.
All right. Are there any other items in this agreement that the authority would like to discuss? Okay, well then I will call for the vote.
And the motion passes unanimously.
Congratulations. Thank you for working through this with us.
oh, thank you for working through it.
Okay, are there any future agenda items that the authority member would like? I would like to report, if we can, at our next meeting about the county assessor and where we stand.
Great idea.
And we can ask the county assessor to join us if they would like to give us the information.
If that is the only item in February, do you want to meet or just a memo to you or something?
I think a memo would be fine if that's the only item.
If it's,
Yeah.
the answer is acceptable to what we hope to hear.
If the answer is not acceptable, we can.
Got it. Okay.
Great, thank you. We are adjourned. Ready, Sophie?
Oh, yeah.